Hello, everyone, and welcome to your virtual AC Day 1, top 3 PR tips from a media relations specialist. We're thrilled to have you here and are so excited to kick off the winter semester with you. My name is Stephen Heckbert, and I am a professor for Algonquin College's Public Relations program. Just looking quickly at the chat, I think I see some of the students from the program with us, so thank you for joining us. Before we get started, however, I'd like to share a couple of housekeeping items. This event includes live closed captions in English. Captions are available directly in the Zoom toolbar by clicking the CC icon. Along the bottom of the screen, you will find a chat button. I would like to ask that everyone open the chat tab up and please let us know what program you're in and what you're most looking forward to about college. Also, we have a very special guest joining us today, not only our guest speaker, but our Vice President of Student Services, Laura Stanborough. We'll be choosing 3 students at random who participate in the chat to win one of 3 100 gift cards from Connections, the campus store. So go ahead and begin sharing your program and what you're looking forward to about college in the chat. Once that has started a little bit, then Laura will pick 3 names at random and we'll give a minute for folks to participate in the chat, and then we'll go from there. Okay. I don't know that I can see all the chat, but there we go. Oh, there we are. Oh, it's coming. So Laura, I don't know when you want to sort of say that you're ready to pick those people, but we're probably ready to go now.
Okay, thanks for that. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. It really is my pleasure to, it's a fun job to pick the winners. So I'll give you the 3 names now. I will, Robin Lee Taylor, because she was first off the bat, breaking the ice. So Robin Lee. And I am Michael Duplessis. Hope I got that right. And I will, I thought this was the last person responding, so, but I'll say Anu Sharma. I see some more names come in there. So those are the 3 winners. Congratulations. Enjoy spending your money at the Connection stores. There's some great Algonquin swag there, and I wish you all the best in this winter term, which certainly is unusual, but I know you've got some great support. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. A member of the events team is going to contact you privately in the chat. So thank you, Laura, for doing that. Also wanted to say that the gift cards were generously donated by our guest speaker, Jennifer Stewart. So thank you, Jennifer, in advance for that. And now, students, please continue to use the chat if you have any questions for our special guest, but you can also type them in the Q&A tab along the bottom of the screen. We're going to take questions at the end of Jennifer's presentation. Session's being recorded and will be added to the Algonquin College orientation website by the end of the week. So you should see that link in the chat here in a second about where that is going to be. And then there will be. So now, it is actually my privilege now to introduce and welcome Jennifer Stewart. Jennifer is the president, founder, and CEO of Syntax Strategic, and she is a leader in the strategic communication sector. She works with several clients in the public and private sectors, advising them on their communication strategies and associated business impact. Renowned as an expert in her field, Jennifer is often called upon by media for communications-related topics. She's been twice named as one of the top 25 people in the capital by Ottawa Life magazine. She's one of Ottawa's top 40 under 40 by the Ottawa Business Journal and the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, and is currently a finalist for Ottawa's Female Entrepreneur of the Year. With that, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Stephen. I'm just going to take a moment here to share my screen. Bear with me. Perfect. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a real pleasure to be asked to present on media relations. I'm sure, as your professor noted before we began, many of you would prefer to be in person. I think that's the personality type of individuals that are drawn to public relations, communications, and media relations. But alas, we're working in unprecedented times. It's kind of the cliche of the last year. But really, really happy to be here, and certainly available afterwards. If I'll leave my email address if you ever want to reach out. I was very fortunate in my career to have a number of mentors and people that helped me. And I know this is a bit of a difficult time to navigate this sector. So, very, very happy to chat. So we'll start with a little bit about me. So I studied journalism at Carleton University. I always knew I wanted to write. And I started off as what they call a cub reporter. I'm not sure if you still use that term or not, but covering stories in small towns. And I absolutely loved it. I was able to file 15 to 20 stories a week, speak with interesting people, really figure out how a newspaper operates and see the side of media that sometimes you don't get to see when you're working on media relations. I did also, after working in small towns, write for the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail, and kind of got to get some experience from that national perspective. I then shifted to an agency. I'm sure many of you, if you're in comms and media, you know what an agency is. It's essentially a business that companies hire to manage their media and public relations. So I shifted to an agency in Toronto. I absolutely loved it. I got to work with banking organizations, people in clean technology, entrepreneurs, and really got to have the pace of a newsroom, but from an agency perspective. At 25, I, quite young, took the leap of faith to start my company. And contrary to what they might tell you in business class, and I love business, but I had no business plan at the time or kind of long-term vision. I thought, I really do have a knack for pursuing business. At the time I was freelancing, business development, and let's see where this takes me. But if I fail, what's the worst case scenario? You've tried something. And that's something I would tell all of you that have an interest in media relations, also take a business course, because it's absolutely essential to even understanding how your clients and your company operates, whether or not you decide to pursue entrepreneurship. So today we've got a full service agency. We have a head office. I purchased an office space in Ottawa a few years ago. We've got a full-time staff of 15, and we work with national and international clients. So the bottom line is, your career path is going to go like this. There's no kind of one linear path, but if you're in communications, media, and public relations, and I do group them into one, learn to write and to love to tell a story. At the end of the day, it's storytelling. It's the ability to communicate, and you've got to hustle, hustle, hustle. And I'll speak about that in a moment. No. So quick career path, just so people got a sense. Opened the doors of JS Communications as a sole proprietor in 2008. In 2010, hired my first team member, and I was, in the city networking pretty extensively. I sat on the IABC board, Women in Communications and Technology. My good friend Michelle Valberg is the founder of Project North, so joined that board. But really, out of curiosity and also out of growing a career path in the city, which is actually quite small, knew that networking would be key to developing relationships. 2013, as Stephen mentioned, was one of the top 25 people in the capital. That to me had a business development lens to it, not necessarily a personal lens to it in terms of ego, but just, people are starting to take note of good work, and that was an achievement for sure. In 2016, we continue to grow our client base, named 40 Under 40, and then current, we've got a team of 15 that's full-time staff. We've got a number of associates, and I'll speak to your own personal branding after, but I do a number of engagements with media, whether that's CTV, CBC, or local media, often talking about communications and what policy means from a communications perspective. So that was a really nice timeline and a little obnoxious, let's be honest, but what you don't see, and I think this is so important, especially as you're starting out in college, it's a lot of early mornings, it's a lot of late evenings, it's a lot of hustle, and it's a lot of work ethic. So it's really nice to put up some awards that people are able to achieve, and those shouldn't be underappreciated, but you need to understand that at the end of the day, it's a lot of work, and work ethic is something that you can learn over time, but that really is, I in terms of my staff, I'd rather have a hard worker than somebody that knows all the answers. And I absolutely love this quote by Scott Galloway, and I think about it quite a bit, because a lot of the times, especially my generation, your generation, we're told to always follow our passion. And I think that's so important, but sometimes you forget that find something you're good at. I knew I was good at writing. I knew I was good at communicating with people, and then spend thousands of hours applying the grit and the perseverance and the sacrifice, and you'll become great at it. And then that's your passion. And a lot of the times, you think a passion should be innate, or that should come to you really simply. That's not always the case. It's a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors these days about what a passion constitutes. So I just wanted to leave that there. So jumping to media. So media isn't what it used to be. So, when I started at Carleton, when many of you would have been in diapers or even before then, media relations was quite different. And I'm sure your professor can speak to this as well. But stories had a longer life. The Saturday edition of the Toronto Star lasted throughout the week in terms of the features that they were able to put in their paper. There were more reporters. Like if you walked into the newsroom at the Ottawa Citizen, it was bustling with reporters. There was a focus on quality versus quantity. There was much less of a stress to file, 3 stories a day and then get on the digital channel and make sure that you were tweeting and you're on Instagram and that your website was up to date. There's a lot of pressure on reporters right now. Reporters enjoyed a specialization. That's not to say that doesn't happen today, but back in the day, you typically had a beat. So a section that you covered, whether that was City Hall, crime news, features, and you really didn't stray from that beat. And there was larger newspapers, there was more content, there was more advertising, less of a wire service. So now, as you guys probably know, a lot of material for newspapers is put on a wire and can get picked up by regional newspapers. So there's less kind of original content. And this is really interesting, and we can chat about that. I don't want to say there was no sponsored content, even though the presentation does, but there's much less sponsored content. So what sponsored content is when an organization, and you will see this in media relations, pays for space in a newspaper or in a broadcast, and they're able to kind of manipulate the story. And if you practice good ethics, you would note to your viewers or your readership that that is sponsored content. But that's definitely changed the game in terms of media relations. So what's media relations now? It's kind of the opposite of what I just said. Newsrooms have shrunk. There is a significant amount of sponsored content. I'm not a fan of sponsored content if you look at kind of what actually makes a grassroots media relations professional, but we can talk about that. Reporters, and many of them are my friends, and and great people, but they're generalists generally, and they're generally overworked. So they're working on a number of different topics, and many have been pulled off their typical beat to work on COVID. It's fast moving. It's consumer driven. It's a major news cycle. It's a North American, if not global, news cycle these days. If you look at the news over the last week, it's been predominantly driven by the Capitol Hill siege. And there's new platforms. I mean, you guys have grown up with this. You've got social media, you have Instagram, you have Twitter, you have LinkedIn, and news is breaking all the time. Again, when we look at the riots in Washington last week, I was going to Twitter to get my news from reporters that I knew were in Washington. So it's much different than what it used to be. And there's a lot of influencers as well, right? For me personally, an influencer is not a journalist. A journalist is a journalist. But if you're working in media relations for a company and you're trying to sell a product, I mean, certainly you will be pitching influencers. So what does this mean? It has become so noisy and so loud that it's become more important than ever to stand out. But I think, you need to take that with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean the loudest voice wins. You still need to be nimble, strategic, and you also need to know your worth. And I'll get to that in a bit. So here are my top 3 tips if you're in media relations or communications. The first is to know your audience, to stay up to date, and be more than just media relations. Build an expert brand. And now I'll kind of get into each of those tips. So the number 1 tip is know your audience. And you'll see the tweet on the left is Carly Weeks. So she is a national health reporter, very well respected. and tweeted month one into the pandemic. So obviously she is just inundated with work, trying to stay on top of what COVID means for Canadians and break health stories, probably the most stressful, busy, rewarding time of her career. And she tweeted, "Today is not the day to send me a PR pitches about the health benefits of almond milk yogurt. Tomorrow's not looking good either." And if you look at the pitch from Andrew below, he notes he's got a PR pitch for a COVID thermometer, and someone asked him if he'd be open to an in-person demo. This is how media relations professionals get a bad rep. And at the end of the day, only a handful of media relations professionals do it well. You've really got one shot with reporters to develop that relationship, to show them that you can send them newsworthy, intelligent pitches that's actually going to help them do their jobs effectively. And you either develop respect or you don't. So here's a do in terms of knowing your audience. Be thoughtful, be relevant in your pitching, and make sure that it aligns to the reporter's beat. So Carly, works in health and continues to work in health. And obviously since March, probably February of last year, has been very COVID centric and very COVID focused. So do not send her a pitch about almond milk yogurt. Do not send a product pitch just because your client is asking you to do so. I firmly believe we've been able to grow Syntax because we provide wise counsel. We have said no to ideas as many times as we have said yes. Certainly we aim to provide solutions if a client has a pitch that just simply is not newsworthy, timely, or we do not think that's going to get picked up, or worst case scenario, it's going to harm our reputation simply by pitching it because it is so out of left field. We'll try to come up with some solutions, but your job at the end of the day is to be strategic and to provide thoughtful counsel so your client builds a relationship. And sometimes saying no has both power and it's got reason. It makes rational sense. So to wrap this up, media relations is about knowing the news. It's about having a pitch that you know or you think that a reporter will find useful. And it's about crafting it, and that's why I talk about writing and storytelling in a really succinct way to that reporter so it's appealing. So tip number 2, and this is probably my favorite tip, is to stay up to date. Ever since I was at Carleton, I've just, the first thing I do in the morning is wake up and check the news, from local regional news to news here in Ottawa to national news to US and global news. So stay up to date. If you pitch the news, you have to know the news. So get into the habit of watching and reading the news daily. And if you're anything like me, you'll become a bit of a news junkie, and it'll just become a habit that you want to check because you're very curious innately about what's going on in the world. Get to know reporters, their style and how they write and what they write about. For the most part, especially nationally, there's turnover, do not get me wrong, there is turnover in media, but there are individuals that you will get to know, you will understand how they write, their writing style, what they're writing about. Follow that, because if you're going to pitch that individual, if you're doing that out of left field, or you're not taking into account what they write about or how they write, then you're missing a real opportunity to be as effective as you can at your job. And if you see a story, I particularly like this one, that your company or client, whomever you're working for in the field, could fit into, identify it. Don't wait for a team meeting or a product idea. If you see something that breaks on Twitter or breaks on CBC or the Star or the Globe and Mail, and you have something that you can contribute to that conversation based on where you're working at the time, reach out to that journalist and let them know that you've got a source that they could speak to that could add even more color to that story. So bottom line, you need to think like a reporter, but you can only think like a reporter if you know what a reporter is doing. So get into the habit of watching the news now. Tip number 3, be more than media and public relations. Build an expert brand. And I think a lot of people are very hesitant to do this because they think it's going to come across as self-absorbed or egotistical. It's honestly the exact opposite. Build a brand so that you can be better at your job and you can be a trusted expert in media and public relations and communications, so people come to you for counsel. At the end of the day, your objective is to have a job that's more fulfilling than issuing a press release or, sending out a media advisory. You want to be advising on what makes news and how you contribute to it and what that conversation means to where you work, in my case, my clients. And you can do that by building that brand out for yourself. So being an expert in media means you're an expert in communications effectively. And that's why, and some have different trains of thought, that's why I think communications, media, and PR really, while they have their differences, falls under strategic comms. So branch out beyond just media and public relations. If you've got ideas on a topic or an industry, if you want to get into fashion PR or medical public relations and media relations, government relations, start a blog, start working on your audience, start writing, things that you're passionate about, show your expertise, but always make sure that this reflects who you are professionally. I really do believe, particularly your generation, that what you project to the world, whether that's social media or your podcast or your blog, it will reflect who you are as a professional. So just be mindful of that. But on the flip side, it's also a really great opportunity. I cannot stress this one enough, and I say it to my team all the time: volunteer in groups for communicators, and when possible, participate on boards and decision making. That to me is critical. I mean, you're not going to get out of school and likely immediately join a board. However, you can start to network. You can start to become part of a committee and eventually the board in that decision making process, and grow those relationships and really enjoy the opportunity to kind of experience that leadership and apply those lessons to your career. And then follow other passions that build your character and your credibility. To me, and I firmly believe this, an interesting person is a dynamic leader. So grow your interests and be curious. You don't need to be your work all the time. You don't need to be media relations all the time. It's kind of a side story and maybe something for another time. During the pandemic, I also opened a yoga studio. I launched a podcast with my girlfriend, Catherine Clark, called The Honest Talk. I really firmly believe that you don't need to be one thing, and that if you branch out to many things, it can make you a more interesting leader and professional. Tip number, we're still at tip number 3, but the bottom line is people seek out those in communications that are able to give sound advice and counsel. So build your credibility, be respected, and have ambitions to grow in your career as a media relations professional, to advise the C-suite. So at the CEO level, provide that sound advice. We train executives at EDC, at the Bank of Canada, at the House of Commons, and we're training people that are making decisions at that C-suite. And you can be, as a media relations professional, that's something that you can certainly aim for, but develop your own brand so that you are sought after as that counsel. And then final tip, and to me, this really summarizes, hopefully what your whole professional career is going to look like when you're done college, is work with people and for people you admire. I really do believe leadership at the end of the day is what defines a workplace. I have so much respect for the 15 women that I work with each and every day, and that really motivates me to do good work. So at the end of the day, whether you are the leader or you're in a leadership capacity or you're starting out, you can always show leadership in whatever role you're in. And that to me is extremely important, to have that work environment where you feel that you're being valued. And that will really make or break your experience, particularly your first experience out of school. So those are my tips for media relations. I hope you guys found them relevant, but really happy to take some questions now. And as I mentioned before, I'll provide Stephen with my email address, and be a little patient with me, but very happy to set up Zoom calls with whomever is interested.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you for this, Jennifer. So there's both a Q&A tab and this chat, so I'm going to try to monitor both. but obviously we're at the point of the event where Jennifer will be taking your questions. So if you have some, pop them into either the Q&A tab or into the chat, and I'll try to sort of stay current with both of those. But Jennifer, just off the top, so what's a typical day been like for you in the past 8 months, and has it changed dramatically from what a typical day would have been for you prior to March 13th of last year?
Yeah, no, I think a typical day in any kind of agency is a bit frenetic at any time. You're going between, 12 to 20 files on any given day. But since March, it has changed. We hit March at Syntax. And as a leader, if I'm being quite honest, I was concerned about what the next few months were going to look like for our industry, for our clients. And my immediate thinking was, how do we adapt? So we were doing a number of physical events here in the city, and we had to adapt to virtual events, the full production, promotion, and logistic planning for those events. So that has changed from day to day. Knock on wood, we've been very fortunate to be as busy as ever. So if anything, to answer your question, Stephen, there's no schedule for our days, and there never has been. It's very fluid, and it does change on what's required.
Perfect. So a couple of questions have come in. One from Michael Duplessis. So what was something you wish someone had told you about PR while you were in school?
I wish someone would have told me that a strategic lens is critically important to what you're doing. I have had, clients in the past respect our organization and continue to work with our organization because we look thoughtfully and strategically at what they're trying to pitch to media. So you are not here to be a yes person. You are here to look at what makes sense from a media perspective, what's happening in the news cycle, and to think analytically. And I think that's a misnomer in media relations. People think that, you're a media person or you're on the wrong side of media. You can be on the right side of media relations, can be the right side if you give it the due respect and strategic purview that it requires.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So another question, how do you decide where your passion stands in public relations? In other words, let's say, how do you decide whether it's for government, for specific brands, for specific sectors like fashion and or tourism?
Yeah, that's a really wonderful question. I mean, we've positioned Syntax as being fairly generalist, but then we've divided up our team into branding and digital, marketing, government relations, and media relations. For me personally, my passion is government relations, communicating to decision makers in a way that aligns with their vision for the country or the province and bringing a solution forward. That is communications, because you're communicating to government how this and why this matters to them. And we had the privilege of working with some life science companies over the pandemic, and that's been particularly interesting. But I would say to you as a student, try it all, because at the end of the day, if you're at an agency, you're not going to be siloed all the time. You're going to be thrown into a number of files. And from there, you'll kind of see what really interests you. And to your point, Stephen, about what does a day look like, I'm a person that likes to go between a number of files at any given time. I don't have the attention span to do just one thing per day. And that's another reason why I really love media relations, because it is so busy.
Great. So a couple of questions from Anu. Anu says, thanks for the interesting session, Jennifer. My question is that if you ethically disagree with the communication or concept of your client, how do you strategically tackle it, or how should we strategically tackle it?
That's a really great question. And I would say you always have to abide by your ethics. At the end of the day, you trust that gut and that voice in your head. We have had, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we've had to let clients go. We have essentially fired clients because we do not believe or align with their ethics or what it is that they're asking us to do. I can think of a number of examples where people have come to us based on a proposal. We've been the successful proponent, and then we get a further fleshed out scope of work, and it just simply is either unreasonable or not ethically sound, and we've had to walk away from that opportunity. You need to think long term, and again, it comes down to your own reputational risk of working with a client that you don't align with, and also how you go to bed at night. Your career is a long-term game, and you've got to be able to be really proud of the work you do. And to me, at the end of the day, whether it's for my team or for myself or for the company, I will always be driven by ethics first.
Question from Julia is, I would be interested in hearing more about your podcast and topics that you discuss on it. Is it about PR and media relations?
So it's actually about women and women entrepreneurs. So it's called The Honest Talk. The website is thehonesttalk.ca. And it's with my girlfriend, Catherine Clark, who's a broadcaster and MC here in the city of Ottawa. And we actually had a vision. We started last December. We were having coffee, and we realized that so many women, either at the start of the career, in the middle of the career, or at the end of their career, get stuck or get held back by different barriers or boundaries, and we wanted to have conversations about why. So we actually just launched an episode 17, I believe, on Friday with lawyer Marie Hennon. We started off our podcast with Lisa Wright, a former member of Parliament, who opened up very candidly with us for the first time about her husband who's suffering Alzheimer's. And we've talked to a number of people in between, whether it's politicians, we've talked to Catherine McKenna, we've talked to an opera singer, we've talked to a former Chief Justice of Canada, just really interesting people. And I've always been just amazed by their stories. And that comes back to my need for storytelling and hearing other people's stories and just being that kind of active listener. So it's not a syntax revenue generator. It's really a passion project. But I'm always a firm believer that if you have a passion and you can make it happen, what's the risk in trying it?
I think that we're actually over time. Sorry about that. So I know there's a couple
of
in the Q&A, but maybe we'll have to have you back in a class, and then we can sort of deal with it in when we do that live and in person. But I want to thank you, Jennifer. This was an incredibly sort of helpful experience, I know, for the students, and I know it was a great chance for them to hear from a professional in the business about sort of what's happening in the business at these times. So I want to thank you and thank everyone for attending with us today. It's a great way to start the term. And to all our learners, welcome to the AC family, and please enjoy the rest of your AC day one.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me.